Marketing in China, selling your product and understanding Chinese consumers, it is very important to actually understand first the context, so the market. China is a huge market. It is not only huge, but it is also extremely heterogeneous. We're talking about geographic diversity, we're talking about ethnic diversity with 56 official minorities. We're talking about religious diversity. We're talking about language diversity, and we're talking about climatic diversity. Chinese process of economic reform has also meant that China is very unequally developed. Usually the coastal areas are much more developed than inland China. The south is more developed than the north. Addressing these issues, we really need to understand that we cannot talk about China as a single market. It is too big and it is too diverse. We need to think about China as a series of markets, sort of like United Markets of China. Very often, Western companies, when thinking of entering the Chinese market and actually selling or marketing their product in China, need to think about a market at the level of a province, or even more often at the level of a city. One has to keep in mind that even if we are selling in Shanghai, we're actually catering to a market of about 24 to 26 million consumers. So this large heterogeneity, particularly in economic terms, also means that purchasing power across China is very much different. Examples of Western companies going back to the 1980s has showed that very often Western companies have misunderstood and misestimated demand for their product in China. One of the most infamous examples is PepsiCo. In the 1980s, entering the Chinese market, they misassumed that the demand for cola products was the same across China as it was, let's say, in Shanghai. This was not the case, as demand for cola products was in the 70 and 80% percentages in areas like Shanghai, but only in the 40 to 50% range in areas like Sichuan and the city of Chengdu. So it is very important to actually address and estimate market demand, which first requires actually understanding what your market is. Is your market 1.4 billion of Chinese consumers, or are you actually catering to the Chinese urban consumers? So actually about 800 million. Even among the urban consumers, one has to understand the hierarchy among Chinese cities that is connected to the way that China is administered and the way that various provinces and various cities are administered by either central or local government. We are talking about so-called tier system of cities, and usually Chinese cities, Chinese urban areas can be divided into 4 tiers. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4. Tier 1 cities are usually the big 4, the largest urban areas in China. We're talking about Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, and Shenzhen. Tier 2 cities are usually capitals of provinces. For example, the provincial capital of Sichuan province would be Chengdu, which would be seen as a Tier 2 city. Tier 3 cities are usually capitals of prefectures, whereas Tier 4 cities are usually cities in the realm of 1, 2, maybe 3 million people. Chinese consumer behavior varies also considerably across these cities. So it is not only the size of the city, but also at which level the city is actually in the Chinese hierarchy of cities. Addressing the issue of differences in consumer behavior across the city tiers, let's look at a Tier 1 city. The driver behind consumer growth and consumer spending in a Tier 1 city is actually purchasing new kinds of products. So we are talking about a rising middle class in a Tier 1 city like Shanghai or Beijing that is purchasing their first car, that is purchasing their first category of a product. However, one also has to understand that living costs and life in Tier 1 cities has become increasingly expensive. Therefore, the consumer momentum in these cities is actually slowing down. Currently, much more growth in consumer spending and domestic demand is actually generated in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. In Tier 2 cities, we can observe the so-called trading up phenomenon, where Chinese consumers are actually going up for better positioned, higher quality, more premium types of products. For example, you're buying a Head & Shoulders shampoo and you're trading up and you're trading it in for a more premium, more luxurious Sios shampoo by Vidal Sassoon, for example. So this trading up phenomenon is particularly important in Tier 2 cities. In Tier 3 cities, one can observe that Chinese consumers are purchasing brands that they're already used to, but they're buying in larger quantities. So the main driver of consumer behavior and domestic demand in Tier 3 cities is actually larger quantities. In Tier 4 cities, however, one can observe then again this phenomenon of purchasing new types of products. For the first time, they're purchasing a laptop computer, they're purchasing a camera or an air conditioning system. One can also look at the transformation of Chinese society and consumer culture also through the type of products and goods that they are purchasing. Starting in the 1980s and 1990s with the transformation of Chinese economy, the first batch of so-called Big Four were the four products that a Chinese middle-class consumer actually wanted to own. So the original Big Four: bicycle, radio, watch, and sewing machine. In the early 2000s, as Chinese economic growth really took off on the wings of WTO membership, the original Big Four were actually replaced by a new set called the Big Six. These were color TV, camera, and music player, washing machine, fridge, and fan. As China has progressed towards a middle-income society, the Big Six have been replaced by a new batch called the New Big Four. These include a car, which has really become a symbol of a middle-class consumer and has replaced the bike. Smartphone, tablet, or laptop computer, which has replaced the radio. And the air conditioning unit, which has replaced the fan. Adding to this, an apartment is also an essential must. So through addressing and understanding the various items that the Chinese consumers are spending on, one can also understand the history of the transformation of Chinese society and economy. Understanding the Chinese consumers actually means understanding the transformation of Chinese society, as well as understanding the many paradoxes within it. Chinese consumers traditionally have been very price sensitive and not very brand loyal. For them, products were something that took them forward in life. They were looking for externalized benefits, not internalized benefits. For example, whereas Western consumers would consume a shampoo or a shower gel because it smelled nice or it made them feel good, a shower gel in China is marketed as an energizing tonic that gives you more energy in the morning and gives you a head start to your day. These were traditional Chinese consumers. The Chinese consumers of today and tomorrow are becoming more brand sensitive, they are becoming more hedonistic, therefore also more sensitive to internalize, not just externalize benefits. However, for them, products still need to do something. They need to provide them a competitive edge. One such example is the illustrative use of so-called baby powder milk in China. Chinese so-called tiger moms, when raising their single little emperor or Xiao Huangdi, actually believe that feeding your child expensive imported baby powder milk will actually make your child be taller, more like a Westerner, and smarter, therefore gaining a competitive edge in life. The paradoxical nature of Chinese society also mirrors itself in Chinese consumer culture. For example, for certain types of products, Chinese consumers will be willing to spend large amounts of their income. For other types of products, they will be very price sensitive and they will be very frugal. So how to understand that? Types of products that are consumed and seen in public are types of products that are seen as vehicles to building face and social capital. A smartphone, a wristwatch, a tablet, or a laptop computer are signs that you are going up on the social ladder. Therefore, Chinese consumers will be spending a large part of their disposable income for these sort of products. On the other hand, products that are consumed in private, for example, in one's home, would be products on which Chinese consumers would not want to spend a lot of money, as they actually want to protect their wealth. The irony is that a Chinese consumer would spend 3, 4, or even more times more money on a smartphone than they would on an LCD TV at home, which is not like in the West. So one would tend to save as much as possible for household appliances, consumer electronics that are actually used at home, but would splurge out on other types of products that you are consuming in public.